Hi everyone, welcome back to Useful Genetics. This is the last lecture of Module 1, where we're coming full circle back to thinking about human genetic differences. And we'll be using these differences to get a deeper and an evolutionary picture of the genetic history of our species. Now, we'll start by basically where we left off in the first lecture, thinking about how different are different people. And we said at that time that the average two people on average are almost identical, that their DNA differences are only about 0.1% of all the sequence positions in their genome. In this, we're actually a little more similar than most plants and animal species, where on average there's about 99%, not 99.9% sequence identity. We can see this is because we're actually quite a young species in the average ages of the species that are alive today. We arose relatively recently, and we haven't accumulated as much difference. And we can see the whole ranges within species differences in this rather overwhelming chart. Basically, this is the extent of sequence difference from about more than 5% in some worms down to very, very little genetic difference in some species that have been recently very highly inbred. And we'll talk about this inbreeding a lot later in the course. But here's us. We're definitely down at the low variation end of the spectrum of species, which is thought to reflect our recent origins as a species. Now, insights into our origins as a species can come from thinking in a larger way about the genetic differences between different people from different parts of the world. And I want to describe an important study by Dr. Sarah Tishkoff and her colleagues. And what they did was they analyzed not just single base differences, but haplotypes. And remember, haplotypes are segments of DNA with genetic differences. So all the genetic differences in a segment. In this study, they looked at their segments were 4 different genes, and they sequenced these 4 genes in 1,400 people from different places around the world. And they counted up the number of different haplotypes that they found in those 1,400 people. And they found 98 different haplotypes in Europeans, 73 in Asians, and 199 in Africans. So already we can see that, well, there's more genetic variation in Africans than there is in people from other parts of the world. This is actually consistent with other studies of human genetic differences. But more insight came when they thought about how much of these sequence differences were actually shared between the different groups. And what they discovered was that most of the genetic variation that they found in Europeans or in Asians was also present in Africans. And this suggested that Africans were the older and more diverse peoples, and that Europeans and Asians represented a subset of the genetic diversity in Africans. So this result was consistent with and strongly supported a view of human evolution called the out of Africa model. And that model proposed, and we are quite confident that this is indeed true, that that humans originated in Africa, and that maybe 150,000 years ago, humans spread through Africa, and maybe 100,000 years ago, a particular group of these people moved out of Africa into southwestern Asia, what we call the Near East. And then they gradually spread over thousands and thousands of years into Europe, into southern Asia, into northern Asia, into Southeast Asia, and to Australia and the Pacific Islands, and up through Eastern Asia, across the Bering Land Bridge, and down into North and South America. This is strongly supported by many lines of evidence. what I want to tell you about now is new evidence that adds a new wrinkle to this out of Africa model. And that's addressing the question of, well, did our ancestors really meet with Neanderthals? You remember that Neanderthals are these extinct type of humans with big jaws and heavy brows. They're the canonical sort of caveman morphology. So thanks to a wonderful body of work by Professor Svante Pääbo of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, we know that the answer to this question is yes. And he describes his work very nicely in a TED Talk that's on the Module 1 webpage. So here's my drawing of a summary of what we know about what happened in human evolutionary history. Again, early humans originated in Africa, and within Africa, they spread and diversified. And at some point, a subgroup of these people migrated out of Africa over, this was several 100,000 years ago. These people migrated out of Africa into Europe and Asia. And these are the people that we call the Neanderthals. At the same time that the Neanderthals were colonizing this new land, evolution was continuing in Africa. And in particular, the early humans were gradually replaced by what we call anatomically modern humans, people whose facial features, whose skull structures are much more like ours. And again, the same thing happened as happened before. The anatomically modern people gradually, one branch of them, they spread through Africa. But one branch of them migrated out of Africa, again into Southwest Asia in the Middle East. And we now know that at this time, they encountered the Neanderthals. So the early humans in Africa were gone, but the Neanderthal people in southern Europe and Asia were still there. And so they encountered them, they mated with them, they had children. Their children became part of the wave of anatomically modern humans that was spreading into Europe and through Asia, into Northern Asia, into Southeast Asia. And again, in Southeast Asia, the anatomically modern humans that were migrating, moving across Asia, again encountered Neanderthals, and again they mated with them, had children, and their children became part of the population that was extending into Southeast Asia. So the anatomically modern humans continued to spread, including spreading over into North and South America to be the native peoples of those continents. But the Neanderthals, like the early African humans, died out. So we know that the ancestors of non-African humans mated with Neanderthal humans before the Neanderthals went extinct, and that some Neanderthal haplotypes live on in the non-African genomes. So African peoples don't have Neanderthal DNA. In a sense, you could say their genomes are more modern than ours. Our genomes, ours being people like me, of course, have Neanderthal DNA in them. Now, this is pretty detailed considering none of us were there to watch this happen. How do we know this? Well, we know this because Dr. Pääbo's team has developed sophisticated ways to sequence DNA from ancient bones, even though that DNA is very badly degraded. It's broken, it's damaged in many ways, but they can sequence it. And they've now taken Neanderthal bones from six different sites, I think more now, including one from a site where the peoples who are related to the Southeast Asian interbreeding happened. And they can identify Neanderthal haplotypes by comparing their Neanderthal genomes with human genomes. They can identify all of the Neanderthal haplotypes across the genome. And what they find is that the genomes of non-African people contain 2 to 3% Neanderthal alleles and haplotypes. Not always in the same places, so different ones, we often have different pieces. And the genomes of the natives of Papua New Guinea and Australia, that's the South Pacific natives whose ancestors participated in the second interbreeding, their genomes contain about 6% sequence patterns from the Neanderthals that they mated with. So what we've done, we've talked about human similarity and human differences, compared ourselves to other species, and then we've done a more detailed analysis of human genetic differences, looking at haplotypes, not just at single position differences. And analysis of these haplotypes in modern people confirms the out-of-Africa model for the evolutionary history of humans. And with Dr. Pabo's techniques for sequencing ancient DNA, also confirms that some of our ancestors mated with Neanderthals in their migration out of Africa. Of course, those of us who are Africans, you're not involved in that. Now, again, I want to strongly recommend Dr. Pabo's TED Talk. It's 20 minutes long. It summarizes in its introduction just about everything that we've talked about in this module. And he's a wonderful dynamic speaker, so you'll find it well worth your while as a refresher for the whole module. Now, coming up next is Module 2, where we're going to talk about how DNA sequences change, the mutational processes that generate all this diversity. I hope to see you there.